Hey, everybody, welcome to Pastor Paul's Bible study for May 20th. We're doing it a little bit different. If you are just logging on or you're seeing this alert right now because you've subscribed to our YouTube or our Facebook page, and you're wondering, wow, these guys are really, really early. The reason that we're early is because tonight at 6 o'clock, we will be doing the graduation for Holy Cross Lutheran Academy, the class of 2020. They have their own face mask made for tonight. And unfortunately, it is going to be a closed sanctuary with just the graduates, and they get to take 10 guests. And we have prepared the sanctuary for social distancing. This will be the second graduating class of Holy Cross Lutheran Academy. So we wanted to do something, but it's going to be a very, very small event as opposed to last year where we kind of packed the place out. So we're doing this because both Paul and myself will be at the graduation tonight. So with that being said, I turn it over to the Master of Ceremonies, Pastor Paul Horn.
Very good. So those of you that have been working with us with Esther, we are going to finish Esther tonight or today. And so I'm going to ask you, if you have been participating with us, to send us something on Facebook, make a comment, give us an idea of what you'd like to do next, what kind of Bible study we'd like to have, what we'd like to look at, whether it's a book of the Bible. That's really the easiest. It's going to be hard for us to do a Bible study on a other book, unless it was something that we could all download or something. I don't know. But anyway, just give some thought to it and let us know what kind of things are on your mind, what you would like to take a look at, what you have an interest in. Could be a certain theology, could be a certain book of the Bible, could be, so just let us know. We'll take that in, and right now we're going to figure on keeping our Wednesday time frame. I don't know, Johnson, we may move a little bit earlier in the afternoon rather than being right at supper time. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of people have gone back to work. And so like the afternoon is not as convenient as it was when people were quarantined. So if you want to continue to do a live one, maybe we push it back a little bit, even, maybe we go to 7. Right. And then we can, people can come home and eat, and then they can jump on the live feed. So that might work.
We just have to check with Mr. Kuchar. Maybe we'd have to go off a Wednesday.
Oh, right. Yeah, he wouldn't be able to launch it on Wednesday night because he's got practice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll be letting you know on that. Looking at chapter 7 of Esther, we have had quite the adventure with Queen Esther to get her this far. And I wonder, Pastor Chris, would you feel comfortable giving them a quick synopsis of what happened to Esther or what happened in the book up until the present?
Well, I'm kind of I'm responding to a few people right now on our page.
Okay.
So,
all right. Well, that's good.
Yeah. So why don't do you want to do that, Paul? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll do that. So Esther takes place. The book of Esther takes place while the Jews were in captivity in Babylon, and in that captivity, there was one young girl by the name of Esther who was without parents and was raised by her uncle, whose name was Mordecai. Mordecai had been in the noble level of Jews when he was taken captive, and was trained to be a noble and an advisor to the king in Babylon. Babylon then had been taken over by the Persians, the Medes and the Persians. And the Persians took some of those slaves, some of the people that were captive, that were trained to be advisors, and brought them into the role of working with the king in one form or another. Along with that, the king, Xerxes, he got to the point where let's just say he decided he didn't like Queen Vashti, his queen, anymore. So she was banished. And they had to look for a new queen. They gathered up all of the beautiful women in town and brought them in to show them to the king to see if any of them would be acceptable as the new queen. Sort of sounds like what, Cinderella, or what was one of those others where the prince had, where they brought all the beautiful girls into the prince,
Whose feet foot into the shoe? Yeah,
that's right. That's it. So anyway, out of that group, Esther is chosen. She becomes the new queen, and so she's the queen of King Xerxes. Along with that, there was another nobleman on the level with Mordecai, the uncle. His name was Haman. Okay. Now Haman was jealous of Mordecai, and therefore he wanted to have Mordecai killed, basically. And he figured he wasn't going to get permission to just kill Mordecai, so he decided he hated all Jews. So he was able to get the ear of the king, and he talked the king into making a law that said that on a certain day, then the 13th day of Adar, which was then it would be our December probably, but on that 13th day, all of the people in Babylon were to be able to kill all the Jews and take their stuff. Okay. And so this became a law. Well, Mordecai he said, we got to stop this. How are we going to save our people, the Jewish people? So he tells Esther that she's got to convince the king that this is a bad idea. They got to then have a different kind of law. And so in the last chapters, Esther had gotten permission to talk to the king. She had invited him, and she said, all I want is for you and Haman to come to dinner. So she threw a banquet for those two. And at that time, the king said, what do you really want? What is it that you'd like to have? Up to half of the kingdom, you could have it. And she said, you know what? If I could have anything, I'd like you guys to come to dinner tomorrow night. Would you come to dinner tomorrow night? So they were on schedule to go for the second night. Now, Mordecai was feeling really good about himself, and so he decided that he would erect the scaffolding, and he would have this big pillar that he would impale Mordecai on. And he was going to get permission from the king to impale Mordecai. Well, it just so happened that on that very same night, the king was reminded that Mordecai had saved his life earlier when he turned in two guys who were planning to kill the king. And he said to his people, he said, have we ever given him anything for that? And they said, no, we haven't. And so when Haman came in, the king said to him, what should the king do for a man that he really wants to honor and have the people look up to? Well, Haman, being in the mood he was in, thought that was for him. So he said, put him on one of your horses, wearing one of your robes, with a person going in front saying, this is the person that the king really honors and wants all of you to honor. And the king said, that sounds great. I want you to do that. Go get my horse, my robe, and put him on Mordecai and walk him around the cities and proclaim that he's the one the king wants to honor. Uh-oh. Well, Haman is beside himself, but he has to do it. So he does it. And then they go to the banquet that night, okay, the night of the second banquet. And so at that point, Queen Esther says, when the king says, what is it you really want? Esther says, I want you to save my life. And the king goes, whoa, But then she says, because there's coming a day when all of my people, the Jewish people, are going to be killed, and I'm Jewish. And he said, who would have done that? And she said, Haman, the guy sitting next to you. So Haman is outed there, and the king is absolutely furious. Okay, so let's take a look at chapter 8 or 7. We did 5 and 6 last time, so we're looking at chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. Oh, I got a little ahead of myself here.
Yeah, you
And
did.
as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked Queen Esther, "What is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom. It will be granted." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we were merely being sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." Now King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "An adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. Well, the king got up in a rage. He left his wine and he went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. So just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. And the king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she's with me in our own house?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The king said, "Impale him on it." So they impaled Haman on the pole that he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. What do you think, Johnson?
Well, I think that really sucks to be killed on the pole that you set up to kill somebody else with. I think that's like the definition of irony.
Yeah,
Like,
that's it.
you set up
Yeah,
a pole to get rid
yeah.
of your arch nemesis, and then you end up dying on it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's
it.
crazy.
What do they say? That foisted upon your own petard? That's it.
Yeah, petard. Yeah, that's wow.
So I had a couple questions thinking of chapter 7. First question was, what was the queen's request of the king?
She just wanted to live, but
exactly.
it was more than that. You know, like that's the setup.
Yeah.
You have to like personalize your request. And of course, the king loved the queen. He loved Esther. He doesn't want her dead. When he said that, you know, when he granted Haman's request, he didn't think about the people behind said request. He didn't think about, you know, and it would have been different too. Like if Haman would have gone to the king and said, you know, man, this Mordecai, I mean, the king loved Haman at a point too, right? Like,
yeah,
like
exactly. Gave him his ring and everything.
Right. Like that's a pretty big symbol that he had the king's trust. It would have been interesting if Haman would have gone to the king and said, "Listen, I really have a problem with Mordecai," you know, and handled it differently, as opposed to, I think the problem with all this was that Haman, basically it was like a problem with the heart. Like he kind of thought he was the king. He's basically started acting like the king, and he took the power of the king and was going to exploit it for really bad purposes and reasons, and ultimately gets checked on it, you know?
Yeah. In today's world, we'd call that ethnic cleansing.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, it was no different than what Hitler wanted to do with the Jews, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awful. But it's interesting that like it seems to time and time again to always happen to the Jewish people.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. You talk about a group that has always been persecuted.
Yeah. In one form or another.
So
the queen asked for her life. Well, that's the other thing. Haman didn't really do his research when he said, "Oh, let's just kill all the Jews." Right. He didn't look around to see, when I say all the Jews, who do I mean? You know?
Yeah.
If he had figured out that the queen was a Jew, he might have had second thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
Asking the king for that.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, how did the king react to the queen's request? That's my second
Yeah.
question.
I mean, he was furious.
Yeah, he was furious.
He was furious. Like, and he
Yeah.
said basically, who dares to like threaten my queen? You know?
Yeah.
And ultimately, though, it was him.
Interesting when Haman, when he finds out that it's Haman, okay, he's so aggravated, he goes outside to walk in the garden.
Right.
And, at first I thought, what is that? What is he, he leaves the room right away instead of, if it were me, I think I'd have just turned and started beating on Haman,
Right.
Yeah. But he doesn't do that. He goes out and then I realized, why he did that is because what you said, the king realized that he gave Haman permission to do that.
Right. I mean, the king's it says that the king got up in rage. The reason he got up in rage is because he realized he was manipulated. Like, he was manipulated. The only person that approved this was the king. Haman couldn't approve this.
Right.
Like, it was because of his lackadaisicalness that this order even got through. So, like, if he's mad at anybody, he's mad that he allowed himself to get played, essentially.
Yeah. Exactly. So how does Haman react? That's my next question.
Well, I mean, it says right there that he's nervous. I mean, he realizes with the writing on the wall. He realizes that the king just figured out what he did with that ring. And so as the king goes outside, he realizes his only shot at literally not hanging is to try to sweet talk the queen, to try to sweet talk Esther, which, the first couple times you read this, you wonder, I wonder if Esther's going to let this guy off the hook. But no such doing. Yes.
Nope. So the king comes in just as he's, throwing himself at the queen, trying to, let her know how sorry he is and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so then my last question was, what happened to Haman? Well, we know he dies on the same impaling stick that that Mordecai was supposed to get.
Yes.
So that's not good. That's not good at all. So chapter 8, the next chapter, what happens? Oh, golly, let's see. Chapter 8. All right, that same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. So he literally gets everything that Haman had. That's amazing. So Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she rose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it the right thing to do, and if he's pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? Well, King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews, as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. Hence the law of the Medes and Persians that we talked about. At once, the royal secretaries were summoned. On the 23rd day of the third month, the month of Sivan, they wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, the governors, and the nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. These orders were written in the script of each province and in the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them, and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the province of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. Now, a copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province, made known to every people and every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, riding the royal horses, went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. Now, when Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of gladness and happiness. It was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city to which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. Wow. So it's interesting how this book turns. Let me give you a couple questions. Question in number 8. How did the king how did the king honor Esther and her uncle Mordecai? How did he honor them or bless them? What did he do for Esther and for Mordecai?
Gave him the estate of Haman.
Yep. And
Yep.
Mordecai got the position with the king that Haman had,
Oh yeah,
including the signet ring. So he's got the ring. He can make laws in the place.
You think
of
he
the
wouldn't
king.
be that fast handing that ring out anymore, you know?
Yeah, you
But
would, wouldn't you?
it feels like King Xerxes really didn't want to do any of the like work that the king did. Like,
Right. Yeah.
you just write the law up. That's fine. Just
Yeah.
sign it.
It's. I think it seems like his focus was on the queen and the harem.
Yes. Yeah. Sure. That sounds good. Just put my ring on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what new favor did Esther ask the king? Now, this is interesting. What does she ask him for now? She says, is there any way to overrule your other decree? Now, remember back a few weeks ago, we talked about this phrase that they call the law of the Medes and Persians. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Laws of the Medes and Persians were forever laws. Okay. Otherwise, every time a king changed, they got all new laws. Okay. But the laws that were made as laws of the Medes and Persians, those laws stayed forever, and they could not be overturned, even by the next king. Okay. So King Xerxes can't simply say, you know what, that thing we were going to do with the Jews on the 13th of Adar, we're not going to do that. You know, he can't just negate his own law. So what he has to do is, she said, can't you come up with some kind of law that will save the people? Okay, save the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as you pointed out before, the king said, yeah, that's pretty good. Mordecai, you work on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Mordecai, you figure out how we're going to do that. Okay. Yeah. Because in actual fact, the king probably didn't have a clue how he was going to do that. How can I save the Jews when I can't overturn my own law? You know?
Right.
Yeah. And so this is when Mordecai then comes out with a new edict from the king, also with the signet ring. Okay. And what does this edict say?
That's basically the king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves. They also had the right to kill, annihilate any armed force that basically, so what does that mean? Like they couldn't even like defend themselves prior to this edict? They just had to sit there and take it if somebody attacked them?
Yeah, well, and what it was, they weren't allowed to assemble in a group and do all that stuff. They just they had to on their own take on whoever came to kill them. Okay.
Okay.
So it was neighbor against neighbor, basically.
Wow.
Okay. But what they said here was you can get together as a people, as Jewish people, and you can fight as a group, okay, against these guys.
Okay.
This, as you think about this, and then uh, they said for fear of the Jews, some people even became Jewish because they were worried about that. And so the Jewish people must have been a force to be reckoned with, even in that Babylonian period,
Yeah.
even in that period of captivity, because the people were afraid when the king gives the Jews the right to kill their enemies. Okay, that makes them all live in fear. Okay.
Yeah.
Little side comment here.
Sure.
The Jews, well, no, you know what? Let's read the next chapter to see what the Jews do. All right.
Okay.
What do they do with this new command that the king gives, this new law that comes out? We're going to take a look at chapter 9. So, on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them. And all the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace. His reputation spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed, and there's a whole list of the guys, the 10 sons of Haman, sons of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. The number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king that same day. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's province? Now, what is your petition? It'll be given you. What is your request? It will also be granted." "If it pleases the king," Esther answered, "give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles." So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they impaled the 10 sons of Haman. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar. They put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of them, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar. On the 14th, they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. Now the Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. So this is why rural Jews, those living in villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day for giving presents to each other. Now Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agite, was the enemy of all Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and he had cast the pur, that is, the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his son should be impaled on poles. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word pur. Because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who joined them should without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, and in every province and in every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of Xerxes' kingdom, words of goodwill and assurance, to establish these days of Purim at their designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. So, interesting, okay? 13th of Adar was supposed to be the day that everybody got to kill the Jews. Instead, it was the day that the Jews got to kill everybody who didn't like them, all their enemies, right? And then when she gets to ask the king for something, okay, she asks for another day of the same leniency.
Right.
What is that? Okay. So
well, she wanted to make sure that she really wanted to make sure that all of Haman's descendants got knocked out. It feels like,
right.
You know, they hadn't really eliminated that, and that's like you see that. Really, I was watching a thing about like dictators. It was on the History Channel, and it's like Kim Jong-un, when he gets power, he wipes out his uncle, he wipes out, his brother, anybody that might be a threat to to his ruling power, he basically eliminates. And you see that with a lot of these dictators, you know, and not that Esther was, you wonder how much of that is like revenge, because she was really on the ropes. I mean, she was on the ropes, and the king could have just said, no, you know what? Haman is my guy. Sorry.
Yeah.
You know, like she was not that far. Mordecai was literally days away from dying, and Esther could have been like the other ex-wife, gone, you know. Right. She could have said, I'm a Jew, I never told you. The king could have said, to the gallows, and it would have been nothing. So like, how much of this is revenge? How much of this is, no, we got to wipe out Haman and all of his descendants so this travesty could never happen ever again? Like, and part of me, like after reading the story of Esther again, kind of believes that that's what it is. Like, Esther stuck her neck out. She was never about just protecting herself. Like, she was always looking out for her people. And so, like, in answering my own hypothetical question, like, I have to believe that Esther was trying to protect her people with this move, with this edict.
Yeah. That's what I would say is true, except I think I would go a step farther, trying to protect them, from their enemies, but also exacting revenge on those who have been against them. When Haman comes up with this decree way at the beginning of the book of Esther, and he says he wants to kill all the Jews, you have this thing in your mind that says, we haven't heard the rest of the story on this.
Right.
Okay. In that why is he so upset with the Jews? Okay.
Right.
And uh,
Well, why
when
is he
the
so
Jew,
upset with Mordecai? Like he was
right.
really furious with Mordecai, and you don't really, besides a little bit of jealousy, like
Yeah.
that's enough to kill a guy. I don't know.
Well, and I think if you remember in the Old Testament, when the children of Israel were moved to Egypt
Yeah.
by Joseph, they ended up being such a force in the area that the
Right.
king was afraid that they would revolt and make
Yeah.
slaves of everybody else.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I
And
remember that. Like he said, there's so many Jewish people. Like if they ever figure that out, they could destroy us. Basically. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And the other thing about the Jews was they never melded in with the rest of the nationalities. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, the Babylonians, when they brought all of these captives from the different countries, their idea was that this would be a melting pot, that
Right.
all the nationalities would dissolve, and what would come
Right.
out of it would be a love for Babylon.
And
That
everybody
all,
would fall into Babylon's traditions and stuff like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Therefore, they had them worshiping the Babylonian gods and all those
Right.
kind of things.
And then
But
enter Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
yeah, and Daniel and
Yeah,
Mordecai
exactly.
and
Yeah,
Esther. I
right.
mean, the Jews continued steadfastly to not meld into the rest of the group. They
Yeah.
continued to separate themselves. And you said once before, well, earlier on, you said, why is it that the Jews always seem to be the persecuted ones? Well, what happened over and over was that the people around the Jews started to say, you guys think you're better than us.
Hmm.
Okay. Because they always clung to each other. You know, even today, you know that, you know, the Jewish guys are supposed to marry another Jewish woman. You know,
Right.
that's how it's supposed to be.
Or the
And
Jewish mom is not very happy.
exactly. And that's
Yeah.
really how it was in those old days. Okay.
Yeah.
So they completely separated themselves from everybody else. And like Haman, all the rest of the people that were around him said, who do they think they are? That they don't have to fall in line with the rest of us, you know,
Right.
that they have their own God, they have their own money, they have their own families, you know, they're not intermarrying, they're not doing any of this stuff. So they had managed to make a bunch of enemies there in Babylon, probably then also because they continued to populate and to function as a nation within a nation. You know, if
Yeah.
you were the neighbor to a Jewish guy and you had permission on a certain day to go over there and kill him and take his stuff, you might want to try that, okay, until you find out that now the Jewish nation, the Jewish ethnic group, has the ability to protect themselves, which means when I go over there to my neighbor's house, I'm not going to find just my neighbor. I'm going to find a whole bunch of Jewish guys ready to fight.
Right.
And they're going to want to kill me, you know,
Right.
which is, and so what was interesting to me was the edict was not to protect themselves solely, right? The
Right.
edict was protect themselves and to annihilate their enemies.
Hmm.
That's what it said. They
Yeah.
could annihilate their enemies. And so the Jewish mindset, and I've said this to you, Chris, before, and I've said it in some other Bible classes, but the Jewish mindset has no room for forgiveness. And
Yeah. Right.
therefore, revenge is very high on their list. They always remember the people who wronged them.
Well, even
Okay.
like, when you go to the museum up there in Washington, D.C., like
Mhm.
as you're walking out, it's like, never forget, and
Yeah.
of course,
Always remember and never forget. That's the
yeah,
line. Always
yeah,
remember and never forget. And you and I go into that museum and we say, yeah, we should always remember what was done here,
totally,
and
yeah,
never let that
yeah,
happen. But
right,
what the Jews are saying is, remember who did this to us,
right.
and one day we'll get a chance to get back at them.
That's what it felt like. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like, there's a difference between not forgetting and always trying to stick it to the person that got you, like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a big difference between that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's and so I see some of that coming out, and the book of Esther was read and reread every year so that people would remember that, like you said, this great leader that she was, who was willing to put her life on the line for the nation. And so
Right.
what they were saying is, if she was willing to do that, we should all be willing to do that. We have to stand up for who we are, and
Yeah.
we have to be ready to fight about it if necessary.
But
That
again, like even, we were talking about like, the Lutherans believe in two kingdoms. Like, I mean, I get that. Like, we have to be able to defend. And there's times in our country where we have to be able to defend it. Like
Yeah.
there's times where we have to protect and fight. And there's also, I know what Scripture says about turning your cheek and doing all that. I think that is separate than what a country should do, or like there's times that I should individually turn my cheek when people come after me or attack me. But sorry about that. I think that was the car guy trying to get a hold of me. Anyway,
talk about always remembering and never forgetting.
Man, John Thomas really got me. I was talking the other day about pranking, and John Thomas signed me up for a car at a car dealership, and I have had about 15. If you ever fill out a form from a car dealer, just expect to get nailed the next day. Yeah. I will never do that. Man, I've gotten a phone call or a text or an email every hour. Anyway,
you're right that the government is supposed to protect its people, right? And so the government has the right to bear arms, and when we function as a part of the government, then we can bear arms. We're not allowed to simply on our own bear arms.
Right.
I'm gonna back off from making comment about the guys in Georgia that are up right now.
Sure.
I'd like to say that what it seems like is that they simply took it upon themselves to murder somebody else, and we're not allowed to do that. That's not, and it's against the laws of America. It's also against God's laws, and so that's just not the way it's supposed to be. But here we find in this section the Jews trying to protect their nationality, their ethnic. Oh, and so what's going to happen here? Let's read the last chapter of 10.
Okay.
It's just a short chapter. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all Jews. So that's the story that every Jewish mother was telling her daughters and her sons, as they celebrate Purim, this chance. And it's interesting because the children in celebrating the feast of Purim, they will take 2 bricks and they'll write Haman's name on one of the bricks. And then they take the other brick and they scrape them back and forth together until the name of Haman is gone.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the kids' observance of Purim.
Wow.
And so that's interesting. But the other thing that comes to my mind is that in the timeline of the Old Testament, children of Israel taken captive, they lose Jerusalem, they lose Judah, everything is torn down. They are taken to Babylon. They're there for 70 years, okay? And while they're there, the Babylonian Empire falls to Persia. And so the Medes and the Persians overtake Babylon and become the new world empire. That's why he keeps talking about 127 provinces. So they're the world empire. They're over all of these things. Now, what the Persians did was they said to all these areas, you can all exist as you want. Okay. Babylonians said, let's all become one people. Let's meld together. Let's do this. Persians said, you can keep your separate nationalities. You can keep, your areas and your homeland and all that kind of stuff. We just want you to pay tribute to us. So they just raised the tax level. Okay. And said, you can stay where you are. You can have your own businesses. You can have your own family, do all you want, have your own religion. We don't care. Just pay us the money. Okay. That same group then says to the Jews here in a couple years after Esther, okay, the king says, why don't you guys go back to your homeland and rebuild Judah and Jerusalem? Okay. When you read that in the Old Testament, you say, man, why would the Persian king do that? Well, the answer that we come up with is God was still in control and he was taking care of his people and he was taking them back to the promised land, which is true. But from a political point of view, the Persian king was having trouble controlling all of the Jews that were living in this area of Babylon. And probably was living in fear that they would turn over and take over the empire. Okay. So he says, why don't you guys all go back home and build your stuff there? 40 days of traveling away from here. Okay. Get away. And in the end, only about a third of them actually go, because the rest of them have positions there in Babylon that they like. They're not getting rid of them. They don't want to go back home. But the really faithful ones, they do. They go home. They want to reestablish the promised land that God gave them and all that kind of thing. And so that comes out of this land of the Medes and Persians that Esther talks about. So that's how that fits into this whole timeline of the Old Testament. Did we get any questions worth talking about there?
We had we had a few people chime in, but no questions specifically. But I was thinking next week, maybe if we don't hear anything, we should do like, I don't know, they have a 7 or 13 week plan in our Serendipity Bible for Job. Like, I know we preached on Job, but I mean, darn, that's a good Bible study. Like, I think Job's even better as a Bible study as opposed to a sermon series, because you can really do some pretty big discussions. And a lot of people have brought up Job recently. So I don't know if we don't hear anything, we should do that next week.
All right. Very good. That sounds good to me.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Well,
so unless we get a much better offer, we're going to go with Job starting next Wednesday.
Right.
And let's move the time. Well, we'll have to get back with you on the
because we got to talk
with
with Kuchar. Yeah.
Right. Figure that out. See how we do that.
So the Book of Esther, very interesting. Thank you, Pastor Paul. And I think that's going to do it for today. We'll update you guys. Don't forget June 7th, the return of services, in-person services. We've already gone in today and separated the rows for 6 feet is a big, it looks ridiculously spread out.
That's almost how tall I am.
Yeah, exactly. We basically just laid Paul on the ground and said, there you go. Just put the chairs in between that.
That's it, yeah. Add another half a foot.
Priscilla Rogers is already saying, what to wear for June 7th. Yeah. What to wear.
Very good. Well, I'll finish us with a prayer.
Cool.
Lord God, Heavenly Father, we know that your hand is on all things and that you are still in control as you were in the Old Testament. We pray, Lord, that you would continue to watch over your people, that you would keep us always by your grace and mercy, strong and strengthened in you. Give us that extra measure of your Spirit that allows us to live our lives in a world that doesn't know you. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right. We'll see you guys tomorrow for Unscripted
Hey.
at 1:30. And yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.